Malzeno is the flagship of Hunter Rise Sunbreak. He is an elder dragon that's inspired by vampires and was first unveiled alongside Sunbreak. As far as flagship monsters go, I'm not too fond of him. I would say he's my least favourite out of the 4 introduced across World and Rise, and across the entire series, I would rank him around here. Sunbreak's final update introduced a new variant, Primordial Malzeno. To be blunt, I consider him to be an upgrade over Malzeno that turned him into one of my favourite monsters. In this video, I will explain why I found Malzeno underwhelming, and how Primordial was able to make him so much better. But first, a word from our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends has consistently been one of the top RPGs on mobile and PC, with over 80 million players and tons of content. In this game, you summon champions to fight in a huge variety of turn-based battles against deadly bosses, either alone or with others. You summon champions by spending shards to use them for battle. There's a huge variety of them, with different rarities. The rarer the champion, the stronger they are, and the better their skills. And there's a lot of ways to upgrade them too. By using these champions, you can go through many different dungeons and fight tough bosses in order to gain even stronger shards, which lets you summon even stronger champions. There's a really healthy amount of free content here, with the single player campaign and dungeons, as well as clans and multiplayer. There really is so much to do. The game also has quite a bit of lore regarding its characters and their backgrounds, explored through a new animated series called Raid, Call of the Arbiter. Many of the champions featured can actually be obtained in-game, such as this orc warlord called Artak, who is actually available for free if you log into Raid for 7 days between now and July the 24th. With all this exciting stuff going on, it really is a fantastic time to start playing. If you hit the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen, you will get a free starter pack including a champion and some cool in-game loot. It really is that easy. Click the link in the description, scan the QR code, and I'll see you all in Raid Shadow Legends. Malzeno was the first monster revealed for Sunbreak, although it took some time before they actually revealed what his abilities were. As an elder dragon, he has a similar body structure to Kushala Daora, having a thin frame with 4 legs, 2 wings and a tail. What's notable here is that his wings have hooks on them that are incredibly sharp, as does his tail, which allows him to use them for attacks. He can actually manipulate his tail to grab opponents, as seen here in his turf war against Lunagaron. In terms of physical attacks, he can bite or swipe his claws at you. He can smash his wing blades into the ground, he can stab his tail behind him and swing it as he turns, and he can leap into the air and stab it below him. He can also strike down with his wings from above or swipe them in front of him. He can even send out shockwave projectiles by using them. Other attacks include the ability to dash across the arena or swing his tail around slower but stronger. He can also pin you, holding you close to his chest as he drains your health. Malzeno is interesting because, like a lot of elder dragons, he shares Kushala's body structure. But unlike Kushala style dragons, he attacks with his wings a lot. Kushala style dragons tend to have a thin profile, and when they walk, they stand tall, lowering their heads when they initiate in combat. Notable Kushala style dragons include Teostra, Elatrion or Velkhana. These elders tend to use their whole body in attacks, as well as make use of some kind of element. Most of them only use their wings for flight. Malzeno using them for combat is kind of a notable exception. While we're on the topic, a lot of recent elder dragons use a similar body structure to Magala, where they have wider profiles but bigger wings that are usable in combat. Notable Magala style dragons include Nergigante, Valstrax or Geismagorm. It's pretty versatile, and you'll notice all these dragons make use of their wings in a lot of attacks, which is why I find it odd that they designed Malzeno to be more like Kushala instead. Anyhow, Malzeno's physical attacks largely involve him rushing you with his body, stabbing you with his tail, and using his wings in numerous ways. Elemental wise, he makes use of Dragon Element, and has a special ability to manipulate airborne parasites known as the Curio. These parasites play a huge role in Sunbreak's story, draining the lives of all sorts of monsters. Malzeno was one of their targets, but he instead formed symbiosis with them. They now work together, and therefore Malzeno can command them for various attacks. He can form 3 Curio projectiles that slowly move in different directions. He can create a projectile on the ground and send it in your direction. He can also create 3 projectiles but aim them at you directly. In terms of dragon based attacks, he can fire a laser aimed at the ground that creates explosions. He can also launch ground-based projectiles that travel in different directions. Malzeno can often use the Curio to power up his existing attacks. Curio-based attacks inflict you with Blood Blight, a new status ailment that causes your health to drain and halves the effects of potions, but allows you to regain health by attacking. Malzeno has 4 different states. There's neutral and enraged, but eventually he will power up using the Curio, causing his body to glow. When this happens, he gains the ability to teleport. Well, I say teleport. The truth is, he can cover distances so fast that it practically looks like teleporting. With this new ability, he can change positions in a flash, and will now begin to double up attacks. His tail stab, his wing jabs, his bite, his shockwave volley. His attacks overall become much faster too. This is his 3rd state, and he can also become enraged while doing this. Eventually, he lets loose with a special attack where he fires a laser in a circle and sends down an explosion, which also launches ground projectiles. This will end the powered up state, but you can also end it yourself by dealing enough damage to the glowing parts on his body. That's roughly Malzeno's whole moveset, and the flow of his fight, starting off normal, using physical, dragon elements and Curio based attacks, before eventually powering up, teleporting around and comboing a lot more. Now that I've laid out Malzeno's moveset, let's discuss the issues I have with it. Malzeno's unique attacks can largely be broken down into 3 methods: his wings, tail, and the Curio. I find all 3 to not just be generally unsatisfying, but worse versions of other monster attacks. First of all, his wings. Most of the attacks involve him slamming them into the ground or swiping them. They usually have a very short range because Malzeno's wings are pretty small, and because the attacks come from these small hooks, they don't physically look very imposing. Compare them with Gore Magala or Valstrax's wings. They're huge, and the attacks behind them have a lot of force that Malzeno's don't really have. Then there's his tail attacks. There's only a few, and they mostly involve stabbing. There's nothing wrong with stabs, except for the fact that I'm reminded of Velkhana. Aside from ice elemental powers, tail stabbing is her whole thing, and she does it way faster and better. What sets Malzeno's tail apart is that it has 3 prongs he can retract to grab enemies. The thing is, he never uses this ability against us. While it would be perfect for a pin, he simply uses claws for that. So like his wings, his tail attacks are just worse versions of what another prominent flagship can perform. Following that, there's the Curio abilities. The Curio are parasites that we don't know a whole lot about, but Malzeno forming a symbiotic relationship effectively means he has an army of vampire minions at his command. Now either he's a bad leader or the Curio are just a bit useless, because he never does anything interesting with them. It's mostly just incredibly slow projectiles, or using them to bolster existing physical attacks. From that standpoint, they're slightly worse versions of Zinogre's Vulgarbugs from 10 years ago. The teleporting is good. It shows how much the Curio have actually increased his power and allows him to stay ahead of you with his instantaneous positioning. The truth is, I only really start enjoying Malzeno when he's like this, but this isn't just because of the teleporting. While in his normal state, Malzeno doesn't really combo attacks together. The only time he will ever follow up is after doing this dash attack, but most of the time he will do a single attack, then pause before doing the next, and that's probably one of the biggest things that makes him so dull to me. It's not just that the vast majority of his attacks aren't very interesting, it's that he doesn't even chain them together until he powers up, making the flow of the fight kind of slow. The unique ones are usually just a single strike, so you dodge once and you're good, no follow-up moves or anything like that. When he does power up, he starts comboing, yes, but even then, the combos are largely not very interesting because they pretty much have him use the same attack twice constantly. This is pretty much the opposite of what I liked about Magnamalo, whose combos were so dynamic that the fight feels fresh even after 80 hunts. Overall, the problems with Malzeno are that his unique traits didn't really translate into unique attacks. His lack of combos made him quite dull to fight until he powers up, where he does become a lot more interesting, but still has a few major problems. I want to compare him to the other flagships of the 5th generation. I find them far more interesting, and in preparation for this video I rethought them all. Nergigante as a monster is unprecedented. Elder Dragons are normally known for their almost but not quite magical mastery over the elements, but Nergigante flips that completely by focusing on brute strength. Punches, slams, headbutts. Nergigante uses his body in full force, and his spike growing mechanic makes him more and more dangerous over time and forces you to stay aggressive. Velkhana is the series' first proper ice dragon. Technically, Kushala could use ice elements, but only in specific regions. Velkhana uses it in full force, firing ice beams, creating icicles in the air, frozen walls to impede your movement. On top of that, she can operate her tail like a lance, jabbing it at you from multiple angles, and the way she chains tail and ice attacks together gives her fight a really fun flow, to the point not even the clutch claw can prevent me from enjoying it. Magnamalo is a bit like Malzeno, where aspects of his moveset feel similar to other monsters. He uses brute force similar to Negigante, uses tail attacks like Velkhana, and has explosive material similar to Teostra. But Magnamalo incorporates these characteristics into his moveset in such a way that his fight ends up being very dynamic. He can use his Hellfire to bolster his physical attacks, but he can also blast it from his tail, either as projectiles, a shotgun blast, or using it to dash across the arena. He's partially inspired by a tiger, and has a lot of speed. I mentioned this earlier, but Magnamalo constantly mixes up his combos, and it makes the fight so dynamic, as if he's constantly planning his next move. I find all these flagships to be better than Malzeno, even when he's powered up. Before we move on, there are some aspects of Malzeno I'd like to praise. His design is really cool, fully resembling a vampire with a high collar and everything. The pink on his wings looks fabulous, and I love how they change colour when he powers up. I also think he's really well animated. Whenever he's performing curio based attacks, he really moves his wings around. Whenever he brings them in like a cloak, he always looks really cool, especially when he's teleporting. His sound design is amazing too. Notable highlights include his roar, which sounds really sharp. And I love his powered up roar too. His unique turf wars really show off his potential, like with Scorned Magnamalo where the two have a proper sword fight, or Velkhana, where the two dragons move and attack so fast that it's hard to see what they do against each other. Malzeno commands the Curio to smash Velkhana's icicles, which is a far more interesting use than anything he does with them during our fights. Finally, I have to praise his theme. It really sells the whole vampire thing, especially with the organs. Malzeno has pretty much everything going for him: design, animation, music and sound. Everything except his fight, which was so disappointing. But that's where Primordial Malzeno changed everything. Primordial was added to Sunbreak in a bonus update after the 5th one, almost a whole year after the expansion's initial release. He is a variant of Malzeno that does not have the Curio. A Curio-less Malzeno is something a lot of people speculated and wanted to happen. I was against it because in my mind, the Curio were the only thing that made Malzeno interesting, and even then, barely. But just take a look at Primordial for a moment. Look at him compared to the standard Malzeno. He's completely silver with blue wings where the pink would normally be. Not just that, but he's way more armoured, particularly on his chest. His wings are also completely different too, with serrated edges and sharper tips. When I imagined a Curio-less Malzeno, this was not what I had in mind. As it turns out, this is a Malzeno that resisted the Curio, rather than team up with them. But the fact he looks so much tougher would imply that forming symbiosis with the Curio was actually a terrible decision on Malzeno's part. Maybe they were secretly eating away at him the whole time. Sometimes you can see him eating in the wild, and what he will do is kill his prey, but instead of eating it himself, he sends the Curio to drain them for him. It's just so impressively lazy that I could totally see how Primordial could be so much stronger without relying on the Curio. But you know, lore and design isn't everything. Let's actually observe what he does in combat. Let's discuss the biggest change. Primordial's wings are bigger and sharper than Malzeno's, and the result of this is that they function like giant swords, with several attacks making use of them that way. One of his attacks has him jab forward and swipe them to the outside, which he can do with either wing. He can slash while hopping backwards, or sweep his blade back and forth. He can of course use them both at once, dashing forward with a double slash. These attacks cover a wider area due to their increased size, making them very dangerous compared to the standard Malzenos. In some ways, these wing attacks are similar to that of Valstrax's, although his are more like rocket-powered lances, while Malzeno's are giant swords. I really like this stab and sweep combo Primordial does. If you dodge to the outside of the stab, you will be hit by the sweep, so you're encouraged to dodge to the inside, which will eventually prove tricky when he starts doubling up with the second wing. The hitbox is really precise too, meaning if you successfully dodge the poke towards the inside, the sweep will not hit you. In Primordial's official render, he is posing with his wings like a sword and shield, which is most likely a reference to this attack where he smacks you with the outside of his wing before jabbing you with the tail in a deadly 2-hit combo. This attack is so fast, and it's literally something Lance users can do themselves. Primordial has a couple of other original attacks, like an aerial tail swing. He also has many of Malzeno's old ones. The only attacks I think he doesn't have are the wing slams, the slow curio projectiles and the old nuke, although I'm not sure if that's all. Speaking of the curio, as the fight goes on they start taking him over as he powers up with them, gaining access to curio based attacks, many of which are brand new, such as being able to launch fast projectiles from the sky. He gains more physical combos too, like backflipping, only to rush forward with a double wing slash. This is generally something Primordial does better than Malzeno, even without the curio. He has natural combo attacks, and even the standard ones have multiple hits to them, which naturally makes him more challenging and interesting than the standard Malzeno. When Primordial has the curio, he performs attacks with them and uses more combos, such as a tail swing into a double stab. He doesn't start teleporting until he powers up even further. Ignoring rage, Primordial has 4 phases: neutral, curio, powered up curio, and a 4th phase. When the base Malzeno teleported, it would be to reposition before a combo or during one, where he would double up his attacks. Primordial, however, will mix it up by attacking, teleporting, and often performing an entirely different attack. The same way Malzeno can be knocked out of this state, so can Primordial, but waiting too long will cause him to use a different nuke attack, where he rains down curio from the sky, causes explosions on the ground, and a series of projectiles before nuking the area like Teostra. I quite like this nuke attack because it's tricky to avoid and covers a wide area, but Superman diving it is still very much possible. It's far more interesting than the old one, which looks phoned in by comparison. After doing this, Primordial collapses on the ground, which is a neat way of showing that he's visibly resisting the curio. Other curio based attacks he unlocks throughout the fight include a triple laser that cannot be blocked, but has clear gaps between them, allowing for good positioning to evade them. There's this Ring of Fire attack where he slams down his wings, causing curio to spread out in all directions. There's also a different nuke that's ground based, quicker to initiate, and sends out curio projectiles. As he powers up, his wings become more and more pink, resembling the base Malzeno. Keep in mind that he's still using his earlier wing and tail based attacks, they're just mixed in with the curio based ones, and as a result, the fight becomes very dynamic as he changes them together in unique ways. Primordial is a complete improvement over Malzeno. Do you remember Malzeno's 3 unique attributes? His wings, tail and the curio? They're all upgraded in dramatic ways. The wings speak for themselves. These attacks are so much more creative and dangerous. I praised the stab and sweep combo earlier, but did you know that later into the fight, he will chain it into a downwards chop to catch you off guard? It's just insanely cool, and you can feel the weight behind every strike and every slash. Then we have the curio. Attacks like the new projectiles, the circle slam, leech laser, or the 2 nukes are so much more creative than the slow orbs the base form used, and he still has some of the older dragon element attacks mixed in too. The tail didn't get much in terms of new stuff aside from this new attack, but he uses the aerial stab in combos more, and the backflip is fun. But something really cool is that without the curio, Primordial has a special pin where he physically holds you with his tail. Finally! Thank you! I praised the shield bash combo earlier, and I'll continue to praise it. It's such a cool move, and I always internally panic whenever he uses it. Primordial is a straight up upgrade to Malzeno, even without the final phase. Oh yeah, I should probably discuss that, shouldn't I? When he's close to death, the curio will fully take him over, and he turns dark with glowing parts on his body, similar to that of the risen dragons. When this happens, he begins comboing attacks at an extremely fast rate, back to back. His longest combo has around 7 attacks. His curio based attacks are heavily bolstered, and he will often teleport twice to try and catch you. His combos will end with a ground based nuke, where after doing so he will struggle on the ground for 10 seconds or so, a perfect opportunity to attack. The idea behind this final phase is that Primordial is attacking with absolutely everything he has, so you have no choice but to dodge everything until you get this really long opening at the end. It's a really interesting idea that they could have easily fumbled, but Primordial is so close to death that you're not dealing with him in this state for too long, so it ends up pretty much perfect. This is also arguably the coolest a monster has ever looked. I think even without this final phase, Primordial would be an improvement over Malzeno, and he'd still be a fantastic fight, but the final phase does well to make him feel extra dangerous, and is a true test of skill. So nobody is perfect, and while Primordial Malzeno is a fantastic variant, I do have some criticisms. First of all, I really wanted him to be available at Master Rank 200. Sunbreak's been placing his update monsters in two different places progression wise, Master Rank 10 for the main monsters, and beyond 100 for the Risen Dragons. Risen Shigaru Magala is the final Risen Dragon at MR 180, and I was really hoping Primordial would cap the whole thing off at 200, especially because Scorned Magnamalo is at 100. The Risens progressively get harder and harder as you go up, with Risen Shigaru being the hardest. I was hoping Primordial would be at 200 and be the hardest of all, but instead he's at 10 with the other monsters. He's definitely harder than Amatsu or Flaming Espinas, but not as hard as Risen Shigaru. That being said, they did immediately give him a hazard quest, so that was cool. I won't break it down or anything, but essentially he deals more damage and has access to later attacks much earlier in the fight. It's a really good challenge and I failed most of my attempts at it. Secondly, the shield bash attack was really cool, and I wish he did at least another attack like it. Maybe he rushes forward, only to sweep his other wing around, you know? I also think it would have been really good if he had an original theme. Arch-Tempered Nergigante and Velkhana both received original compositions for their fights, so it would have been nice to see something new for Primordial too. Overall, I am very much satisfied with him. The Master Rank complaint is only a minor one, and the shield bashing is something that could easily be rectified in a future game. The lack of an original theme is a shame, but they nailed every other aspect of the fight, so I can't be too upset. Malzeno had a lot going for him, with a fantastic design, theme, and role in Sunbreak's story. However, his fight left a lot to be desired, as his attacks were fairly basic, and he only became interesting at his most powerful. Primordial improved everything about him, with better wing, tail, and curio based attacks, and making use of them more effectively with different kinds of combos. The way he incorporates newer attacks and combos as the fight progresses is something I'm always a fan of, and his near-death state is insanely cool. Every aspect of Malzeno has been improved, and I wouldn't even mind at all if Primordial just replaced him permanently for future games. Earlier in the video, I shared this flagship monster tier list where I placed Malzeno in B tier. It was actually from last year, and I feel quite differently about all the flagships now. If I were to imagine that Primordial was the flagship of Sunbreak, the list would look like this. I think he's that much better. With the standard Malzeno though, it's simply like this. Before I end the video, I just want to state something. It might seem like Primordial Malzeno's introduction made me suddenly dislike the base form, but this isn't true. I've always found him a bit mid. In fact, I even found some old tweets of mine where I said a lot of things I later echoed in this video. Primordial definitely helped visualize what exactly about Malzeno I wasn't a fan of though. Also, there's a tweet I made before launch where I speculated that Malzeno would use his tail for pin attacks, which, didn't happen until a year later. All in all, Primordial Malzeno was a fantastic end to Sunbreak, a wonderfully designed monster that improves upon the base form in every way. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to share with your friends, like and subscribe. Also let me know in the comments how you feel about Primordial Malzeno. Do you agree with what I said, or do you prefer how the base form handled things? Are there any parts of Primordial that you're unsatisfied with? I'd love to know. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day.